Hi, everyone. My name is John Leary. I'm the Executive Director of Trees for the Future, and I have the great pleasure of talking to you today about 5 guidelines for restoring tree cover. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to come to you all. I always enjoy participating in the ECHO International Agricultural Conference every year. You are a wonderful community. I look forward to learning with you today, sharing what we've learned, and hopefully seeing you again here soon and starting a conversation today that's going to continue. We have some monumental challenges that we face on a global scale. Climate change, we are at a make or break point as we deal with climate change. Our planet is losing topsoil at a frightening rate. We're about to lose another 1 million species within our lifetime, and global hunger continues to grow. So this community, all of you, all of us working together, I know that we have solutions for so much of this. I appreciate being able to come together with you each year to share the solutions and to really save the planet and end global hunger. We need to start moving, and we need to start being a lot more effective on a much grander scale very quickly. All of the reports, this is from the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, are showing that we've got irreversible and catastrophic impacts from climate change are right around the corner. Desertification is killing soils, and once soils are dead, they don't produce anymore. A third of our topsoil is already gone, and we're going to continue to lose a lot, mostly because of agriculture and agricultural techniques as the years continue. We're losing about 1 million plant and animal species face extinction in our lifetime, and that's truly frightening. Our food systems are having a tremendous impact, and of course the climate changes that are resulting are wiping out species too. There's invasives and of course many other problems that are affecting the loss of species. And it's really sad that despite all of our efforts, global hunger has grown for a 6th year in a row. And when earlier this year the State of Food Security report came out, it's just heartbreaking to see that, especially because of COVID and the pandemic, that the challenges continue to grow. And each of these challenges on their own would be quite daunting. And when we think about all of them, it seems almost insurmountable. And you had forced migration and climate change and all of these. We should not feel helpless, though. We should not feel hopeless. We have solutions. You have solutions. We've been working for many years to come up with solutions for chronic hunger and land degradation. And I'm happy to be able to share with you today what we continue to learn and to focus in specifically on the learnings around trees and tree planting. And I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. I've been doing this for at least a couple decades. I had the great pleasure of working with the founder of Trees for the Future, Dave Deppner, who did come down to Fort Myers and visit ECHO when he was still with us. And he was a champion of small farmers, and he taught us all a lot, and he inspired us to continue with tree planting and agroforestry. And we learned a lot of lessons that we continue to share today through our Forest Garden Approach training and our training center. Many of us in our organization served in the Peace Corps. I did, our founder did. When we were Peace Corps volunteers, we remember receiving seeds in the mail from ECHO. And so we're still here working with you and appreciate the collaboration over the years. And it has been 30 years, and we've all learned a lot. And I think I mentioned the Food Always in the Home training material from 2006 that I have here is just, you know, we continue to persist and to try to find the best ideas and training materials and solutions that can end hunger, that can end chronic hunger. And it's a great pleasure to be with you here today, because I know that together, despite all these challenges I talk about in the introduction here, there is a growing movement. There's a smart movement, there's passionate people, and you're a big part of that. Agroforestry is a big part of the conversation nowadays. It's not just tree planting and reforestation, but we know that food systems are ruining the planet. Integrating trees into growing systems can help us diversify diets and hunger. This idea that green revolution type farming can feed the world has largely Now we understand that we can't do monocropping everywhere. We can't ruin our forests. We can't ruin our soil. We need to have these more diverse agroforestry-based growing systems. And the cereal dominate growing systems have really gotten us into trouble. And they continue to put pressure on the Amazon, and they put pressure in Southeast Asia, and we continue to lose forest because of it. So thank you all for helping to provide some good guidance as the world turns and says, hey, we need to plant some trees. There's too much degradation. We need 1 trillion trees. We need trillions of trees. And people are running around right now trying to find all ways to plant trees. And unfortunately, those of us who have been doing this for many decades are seeing that people are making a lot of mistakes. They're planting the wrong trees. It's not just what you do, but how you go about it. So they might be doing the wrong thing in the wrong way, or maybe they're doing the right thing, but they're doing it in the wrong way. And I think some of the best practices that I get to share with you all today will help at least kind of give our perspective on how we can really make some rapid change based on proven techniques and trees and species that work. Restoration is very difficult. A lot of things need to go right too. This is mostly a young fruit tree dominant forest garden that stands in a deep contrast to the monocrops all around it. But this has fruit trees of all types that are fruiting throughout the year. It's got a green wall around the edge of it, and it's got a perma garden, and it's got a compost pit, and it's got different things that make this plot a lot more regenerative and sustainable than the system that you have around it. And so to take a plot of degraded land and to kind of restore it and regenerate it, a lot of things need to go right. And you got to avoid doing some of the wrong things as well. And so what I've done to help clarify some of this is to work with our team to come up with 5 guidelines for restoring tree cover. And we'll try to tell the story as we go through the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and what it means when I say you can't just grow what was there. That planting seeds is not the same thing as planting trees, is not the same thing as growing trees. Number 3 is choose the right trees and species, and I'll talk about a few today that we should really avoid, honestly. I talk about the last 4 and 5, which are a little similar, and it's don't separate the people from the trees. And finally, pay attention to the community needs and markets. And I'm going to walk through these and tell a little bit of a story about each one, or to try to explain it just a bit. We are in a decade of ecosystem restoration. We are working actively with the United Nations, with the World Economic Forum, with the Trillion Trees initiatives, and a lot of other large initiatives to restore the planet. And so there's a lot of push. But I think it's important for us to understand that you can't just go to a degraded landscape and plant what was there before. And sometimes people may have that expectation, and it's not. And we need to understand that a lot of times a degraded landscape has growing conditions that have completely changed over the years. And if you look at the trees that are way on the landscape in the back, the bushy trees, the coconut-looking trees, a couple other acacia-looking trees, whereas some of those may grow and continue to sprout and grow, most of those have stopped naturally regenerating on the landscape because the growing conditions have changed. There's too many grazing animals, there's too many forest fires. But beyond those, it's just that it's too dry, there's not enough moisture, and it's too hot. Your seeds aren't generating. There's too much sun is the other big thing. It's too hot. Whereas the trees that you see in the distance in this picture, and this is in Senegal in West Africa, but the trees that you see in the distance grew up when there was a forest here. So you can't just go back, and I see this with the bush mangoes in West Africa. And I think, and I welcome your input, that shea, when you're working with shea trees and other hardwoods, slow-growing hardwoods that grew up in the shade of other trees are not able to withstand this kind of 12 hours of sunlight from sunrise to sunset. And so you need to find a way to improve the growing environment here there's so much sun, it's so dry, there's desiccating winds. But if you can improve the growing environment of this field that we're looking at, then you can see the return of things that used to be there. In our forest garden approach, one of the first things we do is we do plant a living fence and a windbreak around the edge to keep out the animals and keep the winds out. And then we plant alleys across the row to start fixing nitrogen into the soil and drop down leaf litter to start building up the quality of the soil. And what those pioneer species, it's largely pioneer species, fast-growing, multi-purpose trees are pioneer species. They can tolerate, and if you look at the type of species we use in our green wall and in our alleys, they can tolerate 12 hours of sun, a tropical sun beating down on them every single day. A lot of the fruit trees and other things that have evolved over the years, they were pooped out of a bat or a bird and fell underneath the shade of the mother tree, and they grew up in the shade of the mother tree, and it was actually quite some time until those trees started to see some direct sunlight and all. Well, that's not what you see in this picture here, and that's not what you see in an incredibly degraded landscape. And so that first point is you can't just grow what was there. You need to use the right trees to kind of scratch the surface, change things up, break through the imperatic grass, provide some shade, cool off the land, and let the initial biodiversity, you can either plant it or things might return, and you have a better chance of growing more things once you start to improve the growing condition. Point two is planting seeds is not the same as planting trees, is not the same as growing trees as well. And so we need to restore an incredible amount of land that has been degraded across the developing tropics over the last really 50 to 75 years. A lot of it because of green revolution agriculture that has just left entire landscapes bare. The slash and burn agriculture and other techniques have. So we can't just go and plant seeds though, right? And planting seeds, may or may not produce a seedling. They may or may not survive. When you're looking at an area, you've got the opportunity to try to grow trees, meaning let's see what grows. And it is a good idea wherever you're working to try to do some natural regeneration. So if things do sprout, you do want to encourage them to grow up, assuming that the farmer welcomes whatever sprouts. But oftentimes what is sprouting there and what happens to grow is not necessarily the key things that people need to eat and survive and to sell at the market. If you're doing a tree planting project, I encourage you to become experts in tree nurseries, find a way to do these effective and efficiently. Just kind of distributing seeds either from a drone or throwing them from your hand is usually not going to develop into any trees unless there's an incredible amount of management around the area. But raising small nurseries in people's backyards, hundreds at a time, a couple thousands at a time, is a good way to get trees planted. There is, it's necessary though, in order to actually grow the trees, that you're there and you're present for a year or two, or you're helping the family or the community or the church or whoever it is to visit the trees frequently. That's why we brought in the forest. That's one of the many reasons why having a forest garden and bringing the garden into the forest, it brings people in, it brings families in, and it makes sure that there's enough follow-up in that year or two, so that if you did plant trees, it results in you actually growing a tree. And so we know if you just go and throw some seeds anywhere, you really haven't grown a forest yet. But by learning how to do nurseries well, by doing the seedlings for about 3-4 months, and then you'll be able to plant them, the trees have a much greater chance of reaching not just maturity, but reaching a higher height in the first year after that first rainy season. And hopefully by the second rainy season, it's above head height. and it's got a real chance of surviving there. The third one's going to be fun. So you know that you can't just do number one. You can't just grow what used to be there, and that you've got to grow types of trees that are going to improve the growing environment so that we can start to grow a lot more things, and you can even see the natural return of others. We know that we need to not just throw some seeds where we want them, but we know we need to be very deliberate about how we grow our seedlings and how we plant them, and plan with the communities ahead to take care of them. And then it brings us to this third one of choosing the right trees and species. And I'm sure that we could go on ad nauseum and forever and ever talking about this, but there were really just a few examples I wanted to bring up. And I don't even think that these are going to be new examples for many of you. I'm hoping that this old picture of eucalyptus isn't terribly, I wouldn't say new, a surprise. Eucalyptus trees are really a tree that I believe that we should avoid planting in farmers, on farm fields, on farmlands, on farmers' fields, on anything. Keep it away. Keep it away from the streams. Keep it away from where we grow our food. Eucalyptus originally came from Australia, and it evolved to have very greedy roots that outcompetes other things around it for moisture. It can stand very dry, arid, desert-like conditions in Australia, where it originally came from. And over the decades, as people have brought eucalyptus trees, and we've seen the long-term effects of eucalyptus in Ethiopia, Cameroon. They tried it in the first Great Green Wall many years ago, and it didn't work. If you plant eucalyptus trees, you're accelerating desertification. You're killing the soil. The roots are greedy. They steal from the crops that we're trying to grow around them. The eucalyptus have no place in agroforestry. If you have a rocky area where you can't grow anything else, I can see planting it there, but otherwise I would say avoid it. There are people right now in East Africa who are pushing eucalyptus to be planted in farmers' fields, and I would say it's a disservice to them. It's going to accelerate and worsen hunger in the coming years. Every farmer who has lots of eucalyptus in their field is going to suffer because of it. That's the trend. It kills the soil. When it does rain, we have more erosion, and after a generation of having eucalyptus on the land, you can expect more desert to encroach. So I hope that's not a big shock for everyone. The next tree I'm going to pick on in this, the do's and don'ts, I'm not going to talk about as many do's, it's really just these few don'ts today, is I'm not going to give the prosopis on the left a hard time. I'm going to give the pine on the right a hard time. Now, the pine on the right, these pine trees, this was not taken in Haiti. This was not taken in Africa. This is not taken in the tropical world. This picture was taken in Maryland. As I was walking around many years ago with one of our board members, Franz Stupard, and we're just going on a hike, and we look over and we say, man, these pine trees just don't let anything grow underneath them. And that's our experience at Trees for the Future, that the pine is a real tough one to use in agroforestry. Between the needles and anything else, and the pine cones and just anything else that it's doing to the soil, when we look at the long-term impact of pine on the hillsides of Central America and all the other places where we've seen pine for many years, it's something that you need to be very cautious about in terms of planting it in farmers' fields, around crops. It does not help other things grow. Our founder did point out, after doing a farmer trip to Russia many years ago, that they had some ways of growing mushrooms underneath pine in an interesting layering effect. But mushrooms tend not to be too popular in the communities where we work, and otherwise I really don't see eucalyptus or pine having a role in agroforestry in the Great Green Wall. As we restore the Lake Victoria watershed areas, I would keep the eucalyptus species out and be very cautious as you use pine. In fact, the last thing I would mention on those two species is that every few years we see an article about volatile organic compounds, how trees produce volatile organic compounds. And And it's really the eucalyptus and the pine trees that do apparently produce some of these compounds that aren't good in the atmosphere. I'm not going to go away from this slide first before pointing out how the photo on the left here is really the more beneficial stuff. And even though the crops, this is a dry season and the eggplant is looking pretty weak there, or the peppers or whatever's growing there, you see all the leaf litter that's falling under those fast growing trees that are in this thick living fence, green wall that goes around. And that is a very positive effect. So that leaf litter from all of those trees is something we want. And we want as much biomass as we can find. And we're going to harvest those trees and chop them and mix it in and get as much as we can and put it into the compost, or mix it into the soil, or put it around the vegetables. But these pine trees are really not helping us too much. I'm going to say one other point on pine trees. So this guy on the left is Dave Deppner. Dave passed away in 2011, but he's still with us in many ways. I still hear him giving us good advice, and I still hear him in this picture giving us a speech about how by planting pine, really monocrops, throughout Central America, and now as they've continued to do it up in North America into the Midwest, and I'm encouraging North American tree planters to stop increasing the density of pine in all of these fire-prone areas. What we've seen is the pine bark beetle came out of Central America and came up and is wiping out. So the pine bark beetle, it eats into the pine trees, and it's easy to hop from one pine to the next, to the next, to the next. And then when a storm or a hurricane comes in, we lose the entire forest and all. So, you know, anything planted in a monoculture is bad. Certainly the pine. This last tree I'm going to pick on just a little bit, but I did not provide a picture of these neem trees being bad. I did not put a picture here of the neem trees. So many of you work in Haiti, and if you come out of Port-au-Prince and you go on that kind of southern route out to Valu and you see the mountains in southern Haiti, a lot of them are covered with neem trees. It's quite invasive in some contexts. And you've got the birds that are eating the fruit, and fruit bats and other things, so they're spreading, and the trees are dropping down a lot of leaves as well. But if I had to make a list, I think we also, so I mentioned Haiti. I wouldn't say that neem is you know, a terrible tree, but I think it's one we need to be that we're going to run into a lot. We need to be very careful about. There was a time about 20 years ago in West Africa where neem was really the only tree you would find in the peanut basin of Senegal. And as you got into the villages out into rural Senegal and got into Mali, this was the only thing. It was kind of considered invasive. Since then, we've diversified the landscape. So as you go to the different communities, you'll largely see a lot more diversity in trees throughout that zone. But it doesn't remove the fact that the neem tree is still generally invasive, somewhat invasive even in you know, real arid zones. And so we want to be very careful about these. There's a lot of fast growing trees that we need to be careful about. And that other point that kind of goes with picking the right trees is native, non-native. And I think that oftentimes as we get into an ecosystem restoration initiative, or if we're talking about restoring tree cover, kind of getting back to the first point, we think that we need to plant exactly what used to be there. And what I'm finding is that in the emergency situation that we have, there are oftentimes non-native species that help in many ways. And I'll point out one. I've got some seeds in my office here, which was originally Gliricidia sepium. Originally, I think Madre de Cacao is from Central America, maybe South America, but that region. And then now we're seeing it's planted widely across sub-Saharan Africa and other places, and it's not a native tree. I think it's important. We don't want to do invasive trees, but in this kind of native, non-native, it's an example. It's a forestry tree. It's not native. I've seen not just us, but so many other governments and countries are using these, and many other species. And so I think the point is not to push one tree or anything, but just say in the mix of tree planting, you're going to have hopefully mostly or 40, 50, 60, 70% native species, local species. Oftentimes you'll have non-natives that have been naturalized in a place and have been used there for 50, 100, or 300 years. And so they aren't necessarily native, but they're naturalized enough so you can confidently work with them. And oftentimes people will come to me and say, John, you only do native species, right? And I say, well, if we only did native species, it would eliminate a lot of the great fruits that we sell and fruits that we help farmers grow and sell, and a lot of the other very useful timber, hardwoods, and other things. And so I would say don't get caught up in native, non-native. Avoid the invasive stuff. Sometimes you use the non-natives at first to cool off the land, and then it's easier for the native trees to grow. And I'd be happy to talk about examples at some point about the fig. We have this heavenly fig in Senegal that's growing under these other trees that have cooled off the area. I'll get to my last couple points here. And the fourth one is don't separate people from the trees. What does that mean? We've always said in the Trees for the Future logo, there's a reason why we have people and trees in the logo. And it's because this isn't just an environmental problem that we have. We need to solve hunger. We need to solve extreme poverty. We have forced migration, and we have a lot of social challenges that we can solve with our environmental restoration initiatives. And so this gets in not just what you do. What are you planting trees? Are you doing faith gardening? Are you doing forest gardens? Or not just what you do, but how are you going about it? And there's an example that I've seen, and it's one of the worst stories, which really comes when people were separated from the trees because the organization and the company supporting it decided they were going to start paying people to plant trees. And it'll be another guideline for restoring tree covers. Don't pay people to plant trees. It's highly unsustainable. And in this example I saw from Madagascar, they start paying people to plant trees, and people start planting trees. And then as the trees started to grow, then they said, well, now we got to build a fence around it, and we're going to hire a guardian to keep the communities out, because now the communities see these trees that we paid people to grow. And so now the communities want to encroach. They wanted to use the trees. They have needs. There's either firewood, or there's things they wanted to harvest from the mangroves. And so now they're told they have a security guard. You're not allowed to use these trees because these people planted these trees because somebody else wanted them. And then there's conflict in it. And it's a sad story. It's a sad example of separating the people from the trees. In any community where you are, this is not purely an environmental initiative. Restoring tree cover cannot just be seen as only a tree thing. You got to think about the local communities, think about their needs. You need to be very careful about the incentives that we put in place. But when you can help communities see how planting trees will improve their lives, then the tree planting can be sustainable. Then all the resources and the ecosystem restoration, all of this is possible if you really kind of tap into the right incentives as we're working with people. So not just what you do, but how you go about it. And that largely brings us to the last one, kind of feeds into, is to pay attention to the community needs and market opportunities. Because again, restoring tree cover to the world's toughest and most degraded lands, we're not going to be successful and have the long-term follow-through, 5, 10 years, 15, 20 into helping the next generation, unless we're really helping communities make money or to really see some tangible benefits from the tree planting. Market-based agroforestry is something that I talk about quite a bit. Market-based agroforestry, with all of the farmers in our program, we're always trying to help them think through what are all of the household needs that you need. Besides food, you need forage or fodder for the animals, you need some fertilizer for the soil, there might be some type of fiber or some types of rope or some type of other things that you need to harvest for the family. There might be timber or construction materials. There's all kinds of stuff that people need. And when you can tap into those needs and communities, I have these needs and we can fulfill them through tree planting, that's the alignment that we're really looking for. Market-based is very important. This is a beautiful environmental restoration, but this is market-based agroforestry. You will see the neem tree that I mentioned earlier. It's in the top left here. It was probably, I think that's a neem tree. Somebody might tell me I'm wrong. Um, and it was probably existing earlier. I doubt we planted it. It's a larger tree. It's not invading the place. It does fill a role. You can harvest some good branches from that tree. That was probably one of the few trees on this field before the farmer got started planting the living fence in the distance. And the mass that you see in the foreground here, which looks like just kind of a green blur to most of us, is a market-based agroforestry where we've got papayas that are a huge moneymaker in Tanzania. And we've got all of these hot peppers and other things down below. And so be tuned into markets. And I don't want you to be scared of thinking like an agribusiness in a way, connecting your farmers into markets. You don't want to encourage, greed that gets us back into this green revolution mentality of stripping the resources and selling them. But we do need to be in tune to markets. You need to be looking at what sells locally. In your average agroforest, we've got products that are being sold to the local market. We've got products that are being sold in the local village. We've got export crops like coffee or something else, and cashew nuts that might be bulked and sent out to the capital city. So you want to be thinking about marketing things at many different levels. If you're working with a group that's restoring a forest or a mangrove area or something, rather than paying people to plant trees, finding a way to grow honey or some other income generating activity from your area that you're reforesting and that you're putting under improved management will start to bring some of this income back into the group, and it helps you think in a market-based agroforestry way. So to conclude, I want to thank you all for your attention here, and I'm looking forward. I hope you bring your toughest questions about how to end hunger and how to restore degraded landscapes. I invite all of you to follow us online, follow me online, follow Trees for the Future online. You'll see some of the Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter handles on the screen here. And very specifically, I want you to write down training.trees.org. It's a website. And go there. You can register for free. You can download all of our training materials for the Forest Garden Training Center. You can join the community. You can even sign up to pass the Forest Garden Trainer exam. And you can take a lot of these best practices that we've talked about today, and you can take the entire forest garden training methodology to the communities that you're working so hard to help. I want to thank you for all of the work that you're doing, wherever you're working. Together, we can end global hunger. We can make a tremendous difference and solve not just mitigating climate change. We can save species before we lose them. We can pass this planet on to the next generation in hopefully a much better state than it is right now. We've got a lot of work to do for the rest of this decade of ecosystem restoration, and it's just my great pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to all of your questions. Thank you, Echo, for hosting the conference again, for having us all here, and I'm looking forward to everyone's questions. Thank you.